What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the top 10 waiver wire targets heading into week 11 of the fantasy football season. If you enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe. But let's dive right into my number one target, and I'll take the hit here. Admittedly, I have been sleeping on Alec Pierce. He's still rostered in under 40% of leagues, which is the cutoff using the ESPN waiver wire. He's only rostered in 36.5% of leagues. And I'm just not going to sleep on him anymore. The dude looks legit. He kind of came into the NFL as just like a downfield deep threat. He was going to have a few big games, but it was going to be, off the back of like 150-yard touchdown reception. He is just consistently producing this season. In week 10, he led the Colts wide receivers in routes and targets, 4 receptions for 84 yards and a touchdown. Actually finally scored, like he hadn't gotten into the end zone throughout the entire season. So that was good to see. And then he scored in double-digit PPR points in 5 of his last 7 games. He's gone for at least 65 receiving yards in 6 of his last 7 games. So he's adding some consistency. This is clearly a different Alec Pierce, a different role in this Shane Steichen offense. And he's just consistently making big plays. So shout out to Alec Pierce. I think at this point, he's in that wide receiver 3 flex territory. If you need someone to plug into your lineup, Alec Pierce could be that guy. Then this next player, I've been talking about the Luther Burden breakout pretty much every week in the waiver wire video, but this actually might be the week. He's only rostered in 5% of leagues, and he had a fine week 10, 3 targets, 3 receptions for 51 yards, but it's kind of what happened around him at the wide receiver position. This was a complete disaster class from Olamide Zaccheaus, and then DJ Moore also had a pretty brutal game, kind of in and out of the lineup. But specifically for Zaccheaus, 4 targets, 1 reception for 5 yards. You might just think, all right, kind of a bad game. He had 3 big drops on, the 3 balls that he did not bring in. One was in the end zone on like a crazy Caleb Williams scramble play. Also, DJ Moore had one of those also. Caleb played pretty well, kind of just got let down. Admittedly, he does have a lot of zip on his passes. The conditions were not great. But then the other one was on 3rd down, would have converted to a first. Zaccheaus drops it again. And then I want to say the final one was on their last drive of the game. So it was just brutal for Olamide Zaccheaus. You even had the game-winning play. I don't know if it was a straight-up designed quarterback run, but Zaccheaus looked to be wide open, and Caleb was like, nah, I'm just taking this one in myself. Ends up scoring that game-winning touchdown. But we're just getting to the point where Luther Burden, when he's on the field, is making plays. Olamide Zaccheaus, I don't think, is shocking to anyone, but he is just not that dude. And so I think it's very possible that we go out in week 11 and see a much larger role for Luther Burden. And who knows, what he does with it. Like I said, in this game, DJ Moore, 4 targets, 0 receptions. Outside of week 9, he has been very underwhelming. So keep your eye out on Luther Burden. This could definitely be his second half rookie breakout. Another rookie wide receiver here in Tez Johnson, who's really already had his breakout, rostered in 27.9% of leagues, and he just continues to produce. Week 10, 5 targets, 4 receptions for 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, obviously, the overall fantasy number gets boosted by getting into the end zone twice, but he is still the wide receiver 2 in routes. He was the wide receiver 2 in targets in this game. In his last 5 games, which is when he's gotten that real boost in usage, he's averaging 13.3 PPR points per game. He scored at least 9 PPR points in all 5 of them. And I think with Godwin continuing to be out, Tez Johnson is in that wide receiver 3 flex range. And I kind of just think he's a good player. And from a dynasty perspective, I think he's going to be in the mix here with these Bucs weapons for the foreseeable future. Another wide receiver, Parker Washington, rostered in 16.9% of leagues. He continued to have very strong usage. Week 10, 94% route participation. Only 4 targets, 3 receptions for 33 yards and a touchdown. But for a losing game, this was a pretty brutal game script for the wide receivers. The Jaguars went up early, played just super conservative, barely passed the ball, and then just completely nuked the lead in the 4th quarter and ended up losing. So kind of like the brutal combination where it's like you lose the game, but you don't get the trailing game script, the pass heavy production. He also had a carry for 4 yards, also had a return touchdown. So it ended up being a pretty solid day. Jacoby Myers wasn't running the full wide receiver routes yet. They were still kind of easing him in. But if they keep Parker Washington in the slot, I do think he's going to be someone who's relevant as like a flex option at wide receiver. Then a couple of running backs. I'll go Tyjae Spears, rostered in 37.8% of leagues. I imagine he was cut in some leagues over the bye. But in his last 4 games, the usage has been fine. 6.5 carries, 3.3 targets per game, averaging 10.6 PPR points per game. He is a fine, desperate running back to potential flex option. Obviously, the offense is terrible, but also coming out of the bye week, there's some potential for a shakeup within this committee. Maybe Tyjae Spears turns this into a 60-40 in his favor. I'm not saying that's super likely, but that's always possible, the younger player coming out of the bye week. And then Devin Singletary, in his last 2 games, he has seen 10 and 11 opportunities, and then he has taken 100% of the goal line snaps. So he is very much involved in this backfield. Jackson Dart, we'll see what his status is for week 11. He suffered a concussion. Unfortunately, at least in the short term, I think you can make the case this is both bad and good for Singletary. The offense probably isn't going to be as effective without Jackson Dart, but Dart does vulture a lot of touchdowns near the goal line. I wouldn't even consider them vulturing, but he gets a lot of the work near the goal line, uses his legs. And so if that's Singletary's role with him gone, maybe he has more touchdown upside. It's still going to be a rough offense. Singletary continues to be a pretty desperate running back 3 option. Then let's just talk about a few tight ends that I think are just very playable on a week-to-week basis. Juwan Johnson, rostered in 35.2% of leagues. He goes out in week 10, 4 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown. He scored at least 10 PPR points in his last 4 games. And then shout out to Tyler Shuck also, 19 for 27, 282 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. That'll certainly play. And with the Rashid Shaheed trade, there's really just 2 pretty consistent weapons that have, been producing week in and week out. That is Chris Olave and that is Juwan Johnson. So Johnson certainly playable in the fringe tight end 1 range rest of season. Another guy in that spot, at least in the short term, Cade Otton, rostered in 34.8% of leagues. He goes out in week 10, 12 targets, 9 receptions for 82 yards. He's averaging 12.2 PPR points per game in his last 5. Long as Chris Godwin is out, Cade Otton will continue to be a really solid piece of this passing attack. And then the final tight end, Dalton Schultz, rostered in 27% of leagues in week 10, 11 targets, 7 receptions for 53 yards and a touchdown. His first time getting into the end zone the entire season. And then in his last 5, he is averaging 13.2 PPR points per game, and he has scored at least 8 PPR points in 6 of his last 7. Then I wanted to talk about some handcuff running backs. I'll start it off with Tyler Allgeier because he actually had a big fantasy day. 11 carries for 57 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, if you're picking up Tyler Allgeier thinking you can play him week to week, I think you're mistaken. I think he is still an elite handcuff who's going to have, a couple touchdown games throughout the season, but his value is definitely still tied into a potential Bijan Robinson injury. And as we get later and later on in the season, I think it becomes more and more important to pick up these handcuffs because you get less and less likely to have these random players popping up and having these breakouts. There are still some, right? I like Luther Burden. If Alec Pierce is out there, Tez Johnson, those guys are certainly interesting. But if you're listening to the rest of these names and you're Devin Singletary would be my maybe running back 4, my running back 5, and my running backs have already had their bye week. So you're looking at tight end and you're I've got a Trey McBride, I've got a Brock Bowers. You don't need a tight end too, especially for those guys that have already passed their bye week. Same thing with the quarterback position, right? And if you actually want some upside, that comes with these handcuffs where if Bijan goes down, all of a sudden Tyler Allgeier is a potential weekly running back 1. Another guy who fits that bill is Brian Robinson Jr., rostered in 21.2% of leagues, the Christian McCaffrey handcuff. He's actually had back-to-back really solid games on the ground, getting into the end zone. Just like Allgeier, he's not playable on a week-to-week basis, but if CMC were to go down, B-Rob all of a sudden also potential league winner. Also shout out like a guy like Blake Corum, just all these handcuffs where if the starter goes down, you're confident they would come in and take a large portion of the backfield. Those guys at this point should be more and more rostered as some of the weekly options become less and less. And then the last guy here, he hasn't played, but I talked about him last week, Christian Watson, rostered in 27.7% of leagues. Week 8, first game back, 4 for 85. Week 9, 2 for 58. With a lot of these weapons kind of banged up, maybe he can establish, a more secure role in this offense, become more consistent. Golden's got the shoulder injury. He's questionable for tonight. Jaden Reed, who knows when he comes back. Tucker Kraft out for the season. So we'll see, if Watson goes out there and does nothing, then probably forget about it. But if he logs a nice game, someone to look into. But that is going to wrap it up for my top targets heading into week 11. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.